C8. Baron Salomon von Rothschild. The Vienna firm. The importance Vienna enjoyed from its being the capital of the empire and the residence of the emperor and his court, as well as from the large commerce carried on there, was no doubt the reason which led to the establishment of a separate house of the Rothschilds in the Austrian dominions. The Jews for centuries played a very distinguished part in the affairs of Austria, and in Vienna especially were to be found in the highest circles of society, possessing not only large influence, but holding also prominent positions among the leading public men. The great consideration and authority they commanded were due simply to their money, for the finances of the country and the court had got so dreadfully embarrassed and confused that the money of the Jews was as a consequence eagerly sought for and demanded. In spite of the wealth of the aristocracy, the assistance of the accommodating Israelites was continually found necessary, and borrowing and lending were the order of the day. Even in the time of Ferdinand II, the Jews were on intimate relations with the imperial court, although they were at that time subject to a poll tax, and compelled to wear pointed hats and a yellow patch on their left arm, that they might be at once distinguished from the Christian citizens. They were not even allowed to live where they pleased, but were cut off from the Christians and forced to dwell in a particular part of the city, the Leopoldsvorstadt. Nonetheless, they were readily tolerated, for they were extremely useful, not to say indispensable, to the court. They also enjoyed very considerable privileges, and were under the direct protection of the government. They knew how to amass fortunes by evil as well as honest means, for in the Frankfurt Relation of 1667 it was stated that Herschel Mayer had been arrested for having defrauded the emperor during a period of 23 years of no less a sum than 2,200,000 guldens, contributions of his co-religionists. He was sentenced to life banishment from Vienna, and to the payment of a penalty of 70,000 guldens. In 1670 the Jews and the students of Vienna had a collision, which terminated in rioting and other excesses, causing the Jews to be driven out and compelled to quit the Judenstadt, or, as it is now called, the Leopoldstadt, whilst their synagogue was converted into a Catholic church. However, it was not long ere the president of the chamber, von Zinzendorf, granted them permission to return to their homes. All the financial business with the court was placed in the hands of the court factor Samuel Oppenheimer, a privilege which secured him the deadly hatred of the whole commercial body. This bitter feeling vented itself in 1700, and again in 1706, in a violent tumult, during which his house was attacked and sacked, money and valuables stolen, letters and account books torn to pieces. The rich Israelite had even some difficulty in escaping alive with his family. Still, the lucrative relations he had held with the court were resumed as before, notwithstanding that his firm became bankrupt in the interval between the two riots. In 1706, however, his affairs were again reviving, as he had secured the contract for supplying the army in Italy during the War of the Spanish Succession. Joseph II, in 1783, astonished, if he did not scandalize, the Christian world, by creating the first Jewish baron in the person of the banker Joseph Michael Arnstein, whose wife, Fanny Itzig of Berlin, was a special favorite of the emperor. During the Congress of Vienna, the families of the sovereigns of the money market, Arnstein and Xkles, were conspicuous above all in the festivals and carnivals which then took place. The wives of both these financiers were natives of Berlin, being daughters of the rich Jewish banker Itzig, a well-known personage during the reign of Frederick the Great. The Austrian government, not only before, but after the Congress, arranged many important financial operations with these two firms, as well as with several others. The House of Rothschild, however, after establishing a house of business in Vienna to cooperate with those already existing in Frankfurt and London, soon eclipsed all competitors by their enormous wealth and magnificent receptions. With the formation of this new establishment, a fresh page opens in the history of the finances and money market of the Austrian Empire, owing to the influence and sway exercised by Baron Salomon von Rothschild. The Austrian Empire, consisting as it does of a union of numerous and varied kingdoms and provinces, is one of the greatest confederations of people and nationalities in the world. Under the rule of its distinguished sovereigns Maria Theresa and Joseph I, its importance and power grew in all directions. Its revenues and tax-paying capabilities increased and its finances assumed a flourishing aspect. Many of its loans were arranged through the Dutch bankers, Hope and Gall, and through the well-known firm of Bethmann Brothers, in Frankfurt. The Austrian funds were in great favor with the public, and generally saleable at par. It was only when the political sky of Austria became overclouded, and when its financial schemes were exhausted, that these foreign banking houses withdrew, and in their places appeared the Vienna firms of Fries & Co., Arnstein and Escles, Gay-Mueller & Co., and Steiner & Co. By the agency of these four firms, Austria, during the period of the War of the French Revolution and her struggle with Napoleon, contracted a number of loans on terms far less favorable than formerly. So low indeed had the credit of the empire been brought by the misfortunes and the sufferings incidental to its protracted efforts to oppose the ambition of the French, that the syndicate of the four bankers above named would consent to take up the 5% loan of 1809 only at a discount of 40%. And with the state domains pledged to them as security. After having amassed millions by their participation in the various government loans, as well as through large and lucrative bill business on Augsburg for the government account, the firm of Steiner & Co. were content to rest on their laurels, and withdrew from the syndicate. Little did Steiner, the head of the firm, a discreet and shrewd man, anticipate that within a few years of his death the millions he had bequeathed his heirs would be all lost or squandered away. The place formerly occupied in the syndicate by Steiner & Co. was now filled by the firm of Rothschild, who brought with them new schemes on which to conduct the government loans. The scheme adopted was the lottery plan, which at Onco became popular with the public. The amount produced by the loans was soon exhausted, owing to the yearly drawings which formed the leading feature of the innovation. The consequence was that the loans brought out on this plan were constantly being renewed. This the contractors by no means regretted, seeing that their profits were necessarily multiplied, and stock exchange speculation promoted. After the overthrow of Napoleon, the Rothschilds acted on principles directly opposed to those on which they had always hitherto proceeded. Their object was apparently to reverse all that they had previously done, and so, whereas they had formerly striven to depreciate the government funds, they now did their best to force them up in the market. Steadily and by degrees the prices recovered, so that the 5% loan, which we have said was issued at a loss of 40%, was eventually redeemed at 106 to 109. The difference between these two prices was not at all a bad profit for the Rothschilds to realize as the result of their operations. Not so fortunate was the firm of Fries & Co. in its association with the government loans. Although the only son, Count Fries, inherited some 6 or 8 million guldens and through his bill business gained 100,000 annually, he was nevertheless forced in 1824 to abandon the court and Vienna and fly to Paris, where he soon afterwards died. By this catastrophe the remaining members of the syndicate were reduced to the firms of Gay-Mueller, Arnstein and Escles, and Rothschild. Later on they admitted into their ranks the Vienna millionaire and banker Baron Simon George Sina, and these four firms continued to undertake the frequent and endless loans which the government were forced to solicit from its subjects. The two brothers Gay-Mueller, by whom the business was founded, had already retired and were living on the fortunes they had gained. The sole head of the firm after their retirement was their nephew Faulkner, who subsequently assumed the name von Gay-Mueller, and whom they had brought up and adopted as a son. He possessed a capital of 1 million thalers, which, however, he soon ran through and then made off one night without leaving any clue as to his destination. On the 12th February, 1843, 19 months after the failure of the firm, a warrant was issued and published for the arrest of the fugitive on a charge of embezzlement. In like manner the brothers Schick, Steiner's heirs, were advertised, arrested, and brought to trial. At that time nearly all the business firms were imperiled and shaken to their foundations. The Rothschilds alone met the shock unmoved, deriving additional power and strength from the trials they had so successfully encountered. Besides this government business, the Vienna house of the Rothschilds, at the head of which was Baron Salomon von Rothschild, the second son of old Mayor Amschel, was ever ready to embark in enterprise of any sort which promised to prove lucrative. For Prince Esterhazy and many other members of the high Austrian nobility he issued in conjunction with the house in Frankfurt many loans, of which we gave particulars in a previous page. He also established a fire insurance company, the shares of which he was able to sell at a handsome premium. In addition to all these enterprises he had his immense bill business, which brought him in a regular and unfailing profit. In 1836 the firm took over from the Austrian government the contract for the construction of the railway from Vienna to Bochnia, and before even a sod had been turned or a shovel used the whole of the 12 million shares were sold at a premium of 15%. The shares in 1841 had already fallen from 115 to 62, and the government were compelled to assist the undertaking by an advance of 5 millions, but before the end of the year they took into their own hands the completion of the line. As in all other countries where the Rothschilds were domiciled, so in Vienna, the money market was completely under the control of the house established there. The prices of the funds and other securities rose or fell according to the pressure or support they received at the hands of Baron Salomon. Every day, from the opening of the bourse at 12 o'clock to its close at 4, he was besieged by brokers and stock jobbers anxious to give him reports of the tendency of the market, and eager to receive and execute his commissions. Speculation in stocks was, however, far from confined to these hours, as long before and long after the bourse was open the speculators were in the habit of congregating in the well-known cafe in the Greenangergasse, which establishment was rented by the stock exchange folk, and free to the public. Here the dealings and speculations in stocks were carried on without intermission till late at night, for the prices of the funds and shares of every sort were quoted and dealt in as regularly as on the bourse itself. The transactions were indeed far larger on this unofficial market than on the privileged and recognized bourse. Rothschild had in his service a stock jobber at a fixed salary of 12,000 guldens, irrespective of his immense commissions. This person used to wait upon Rothschild early every morning, when together they concerted the plans for the day's operations. The stock jobber had his clients and customers not only on the bourse but also in the Panburen Lager with whom he concluded his purchases and sales. He kept a number of runners in his employ, whose sole duty it was to run backwards and forwards from him to Rothschilds with reports of all the fluctuations in prices and the disposition of the markets, and to return with orders to be carried out for the purpose of raising or depressing prices as circumstances or convenience dictated. Naturally, those speculators and gamblers who were not initiated into his plans fared badly, and were frequently ruined by Rothschild's manipulations. This factotum of Baron Salomon was a poor man when he first became acquainted with the great financier, but it was not long ere he also joined the ranks of the millionaires. So strong were the faith and confidence placed in him, that he was entrusted with the control of affairs and the procuration signature whenever Baron Salomon left Vienna on business or pleasure. The House of Rothschild played a prominent part in nearly all the great Austrian financial operations. Most of the loans have passed through its hands, and on more than one occasion was the head of the firm consulted with respect to the private fortune of the imperial family. He was a trusted counselor with whom family secrets were perfectly safe, and he had always free access to the ministerial cabinet. Councillor Brentano of the finance department had indeed formerly been the agent in Trieste of the Frankfurt House for its money transactions with the East, but its present agents there are Messrs. Morpargo and Parenti. The energies and influence of the firm were not by any means confined to purely financial matters, for it was known to have been interested in the success of several mining and industrial adventures. It is no secret that the large quicksilver mines of Almaden in Spain are mortgaged to the Rothschilds. These mines are the only rivals worthy of the name with which the Austrian mines in Idria, producing some 3,000 centners annually, have to contend. To prevent any injurious competition between the Spanish and the Austrian mines, an understanding was effected through the all-powerful influence of the Rothschilds. By this understanding the price of both quicksilver and cinnabar was kept up at a certain figure, which was not to be altered unless both parties consented to the change. The agreement, however, has for some years past been null and ineffective owing to the discovery of immense quicksilver deposits in America, a discovery which has put an end to a uniform price being maintained for any length of time in Europe. The city of Vienna derived many direct and indirect benefits from the presence of Baron Salomon, as independently of his noble beneficence and liberality, its general prosperity must have been increased by the immense business introduced by his firm. A very pleasing recognition of his great services was made him in 1843, when the mayor of Vienna, accompanied by the Austrian ministers von Kolowrat and Hardig, handed him as a New Year's gift the diploma or deed stating that he had been elected an honorary freeman of the city, as he was prevented by his nationality and religious persuasion from ever becoming a free citizen. This document stated that he had been elected an honorary freeman not only on account of his services to the monarchy in general, but more especially in recognition of his great and praiseworthy exertions on behalf of the welfare of the city, by means of his quiet and unobtrusive charity, which had won him universal respect and esteem. An amusing tale is related of Baron Salomon with reference to a certain cabby who it is to be presumed was generally employed by his son, a great patronizer of cabs and a very liberal man with his money. It was nothing unusual for him to give the drivers 4 or 5 times the amount of their legal fare. On one occasion Baron Salomon, after alighting, paid the man the legal fare, not a penny more nor less. The Jehu regarded the coin in his open palm with a significant glance, which caused the Baron to inquire whether it was not correct. "Quite correct, and I am much obliged. But your son would have given me 3, 4, or 6 times as much." "Indeed, would he? Well, he has a rich father. I have not." As we have already mentioned, the Vienna House issued, now alone, now in conjunction with other firms, several loans on behalf of the Austrian government. The first of these loans was that of 1,820 for 20,800,000 guldens, undertaken by the Rothschilds and David Preich in Vienna. This was issued in tickets of 100 guldens each, bearing premiums, and was paid off in the regular course of time by the end of 1840, by means of yearly drawings. The success of this loan was due mainly to the great inducement held out to the public in the shape of the large prizes to be won. The same two firms contracted for the second loan of 1,821, amounting to 37.5 millions, in bonds of 250 guldens, and redeemed by means of 14 drawings by the end of 1841. At the close of 1823, Austria opened a loan of 25 million guldens with Rothschild, Baring Brothers and Irving and Co. in London. This loan was required to provide the payment of the subsidies of 2.5 million sterling due to England for her defence of Belgium. Again, on the 1st December 1829, a loan of 25 millions required to pay off treasury bills was concluded with Rothschild, Gay-Muller and Co., Arnstein and Escles and Sina. In 1834 a further loan of 25 millions was issued by these four allied firms, and was followed in 1839 by one of 30 millions. Both these loans were issued on far more favourable terms to the government than had been the case on previous occasions, the interest payable on the first being 5, and on the second 4%. In 1842 Austria was again forced to seek the assistance of Rothschild and his colleagues, the result being a loan of 40 million guldens, on which the contracting bankers are estimated to have made 4 millions clear profit. After the death of Baron Salomon, the business passed into the hands of his son Baron Anselm von Rothschild, who retained the direction until his death in 1879, when his 3 sons Ferdinand, Nathan, and Salomon Albert succeeded him. The 2 first named have never taken any active share in its control, preferring to leave the helm wholly and solely in the hands of their youngest brother, Salomon Albert. They were not anxious to face the worry and responsibility attaching to the management of the firm. Quite satisfied with the possession of a handsome fortune, they, like wise men, determined to rest content with what they had and to retire to the enjoyment of the pleasures of society. Baron Ferdinand has long ceased to be an Austrian, having for many years past been an Englishman by the process of naturalization. He married Evelina, the daughter of Baron Lionel de Rothschild, but lost her after 1 short year of wedded life. Her loss was a severe blow to him, for he was most fondly attached to his young wife. Of late years he has figured prominently as one of the leaders of society. His country house at Wadsden is the scene, during the summer months, of the most brilliant reunions and garden parties. Scarcely a day passes by without the arrival of parties of distinguished visitors, often including royalty and members of the diplomatic body, who are received and entertained in a truly princely style. Balls, fetes, shooting parties follow in rapid succession until the winter season approaches, when Baron Ferdinand returns to his palatial residence in the Rothschild quarter of Mayfair. He now represents the Aylesbury division of Buckinghamshire in Parliament.